He's always been a bit clumsy.
You know me, clumsy, Parker. Help! Mr. Campbell, I remembered I left something in the bathroom. Deuces. Parker out.
Superpower size kid, know you want a neighbor like me. Look out.
Somebody help me! He's running, grab him! Gotcha!
I thought it was dead meat.
Check out our next victim in his dumbass costume.
Is my suit really that bad? Ouch.
Great. Hi, Jeff. It's Alistair from Zavvi in the UK. Congratulations on the series.
Thank you so much.
So I saw that you, like me and many of our generation, we grew up with the Fox Kids animated Spider-Man series. I was just wondering, first off, if you consider this series in any way to be a love letter to that beloved series.
Oh yeah, I love that series so much. I can't stop talking about growing up watching it, and like the first time I saw Venom, how I like got chills. I was like, oh my god, this is the coolest character ever. And like the world at large, like being introduced to Black Cat and so on and so forth, like that show is the reason I'm not just a Spider-Man fan, but a comic fan and hero fan in general. So very much this show, I want to pay homage to that and so many other series and games and comics and films. So yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I mean, of course, you're freed from the MCU timeline, essentially. This takes place in a different Earth altogether. So I want to start with, the big question, which is essentially, how does this Peter Parker differ from the others that we've seen before?
He's got a different supporting group. I think there's something where like every Spider-Man across every show, film, etc., they all have an Aunt May. And
yeah,
that's kind of where then things can change. And very much so, we have our Aunt May, our Rock, our Constant, but then the rest of Peter's world changes. And I think that influences who Peter is so much, because while Peter is a very like strong character, he's also very influenced by the world around him. So just by plucking him out of where he normally is and putting him with a Nico Minoru, Alani Lincoln, Pearl Pongan, these are all characters that will influence him in different ways that make this Spider-Man feel reminiscent of the classic Spider-Man, but also unique to our show.
And in addition just to Peter Parker's like school world and daily life, I mean, also it feels like the villains have been like very drastically reimagined. I mean, Norman Osborn isn't the same figure that we've sort of come to know. I mean, yes. Would you describe him as more of a mentor figure this time around? Or again, is it something more jagged, more complicated?
I'd say he's a mentor figure, but I don't think there is a version of Norman Osborn that's not complicated.
Yeah.
But I think that's fun too, that like this Norman is different from any other Norman we've seen. So I think initially you're going to come into the series like, oh, it's Norman Osborn. We all know where that's going. Can we even trust this guy? Of course not. And the fact that this Norman is different, this Norman presents, arguments in a different way. Is this a Norman you can trust? Are we bringing a distrustful heir to a guy that's just doing his best? Who knows? I think those are the questions that I really wanted to ask. And by introducing this Norman, a different version of Harry, a different version of characters we know and love, you always kind of are like, whoa, I'm bringing preconceived notions based on what the history of this character, but is this character the same?
Would you say it's a more morally complicated Spider-Man in general?
100%. I mean, I think just him having a mentor already feels so different from the Spidey we know in the comics. And him having a very different mentor than the one he had in the MCU already is going to feel even more different. So yeah, it's a big morality play in a lot of ways for sure.
Because I mean, there obviously isn't like with great power comes great responsibility thing in the early episodes. And as we see him sort of, in the early stages of being Spider-Man, there are times when he will, try and stop people he believes are villains that are actually just people struggling and were just acting in sort of moments of madness to try and help feed themselves, try and get money. I mean, is that something that you wanted to play on, that sort of like, I don't know, that sort of idea of heroism being sort of skewed?
Definitely. I think it's also like, there's always things aren't always like black and white. There's a morality, there's a gray area. And Spider-Man is a character that very much can live in that gray area because he realizes that like sometimes people do bad things for good reasons. And I think if, depending on who your mentor is or who you're surrounded by, they may not see things that way. So at the end of the day, we are like always kind of in Peter's headspace and viewing his judgment to see how he views things. Because at the end of the day, Peter's a hero and anyone can try to tell you how to hero, but that's the thing, you kind of have to make those decisions for yourself in a lot of ways. And that's kind of Peter's journey to see, does he trust himself to make those decisions?
So we're obviously in a sister timeline, and throughout the series, we see sort of famous storylines in the background. I'm not going to go into more detail about that. See famous storylines like happen in the background. And I just want to know, from a writing perspective, did you feel more or less freedom when it came to, having famous storylines that people love, but also being able to do whatever you want with them?
I felt so much freedom and support. I think that's the thing too, is like having the option to bring in these things is great because it tells the world at large, like, okay, we're very New York focused. This is your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. This is his lens, but in the background, other things are happening. And do these things come into play later? Does that affect Peter now? It lets us set a place in the world and also like, here's what's happening in the world today, but also here's the characters that we're following and how does this kind of like rain down onto them. So it's very freeing in that, it also allows us to do things that we might not be able to if we were 100% tied into the main timeline. Could Daredevil show up in this show? Who's to say before Born Again comes out? So just that in itself allows us a little more wiggle room because we aren't necessarily 100% lined up, but we can still have some influences.
Was there like an earlier iteration of the show that was more sort of closely aligned with the Marvel universe as we know it?
I think there's a lot of conversation about that. And I think there's a lot of thoughts of like, oh, well, it was this and it kind of got scrapped. Honestly, it was never that. Like there was a version that lived for like 2 months of us trying to figure out how we would make it work in writing. And that's kind of it. Like by the time the show was announced, we were already doing this. I just put up in the script from episode 1 the other day, and like it is pretty like 90% what's on the screen. So there's never really been like a huge shift other than like that initial figuring out phase.
So of course, this is a Spider-Man story. The first episode features a multiversal portal. People are going to compare to the Spider-Verse movies, and I just want to know, are you daunted by that comparison?
I am inspired by it. I love those films. I saw Spider-Verse in the theater, the first one, like 7 times. So like to say I love those films is an understatement. And I think regardless of if there were portals or not, people are always going to compare the two. But I think they're both very fun. And I think that people will be excited about this series the way they are excited about the Spider-Verse series. Because intrinsically, when it gets down to it, they both have a lot of heart. And that's the big thing for Spider-Man.
Ouch!
Well, yeah.
Oh! Watch out for that ladder! Just consider it a good deed from your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. That's me, by the way. I'm Spider-Man.
There we go, there we go, there we go again. Swinging through the city so fast you could barely notice him.
I truly believe that I have these powers to help people, to protect them.
Need my city, you need me. Taking off the mask, I know what you see. Know you want a neighbor like me. Just a young man cleaning up the streets.
Hi, Hudson. It's Alistair from Zavvi in the UK. Congratulations on the series.
Thank you, brother.
I mean, you voiced Peter Parker for the first time 4 years ago in an episode of What If. I mean, did Marvel sort of treat that as an unofficial audition for this series?
It feels that way. There's a lot that I'll never know, and I think that falls into that basket. But yeah, that was kind of the jumping off point.
I mean, obviously, this Peter Parker doesn't have zombies to contend with this time. But I mean, do you see this version of the character similar to the one that you previously played in that episode? Or did you just go back to the drawing board and just treat him as a completely new figure?
It's a great question because I had to ask myself that and try and decide because it's funny. It's each iteration of Spider-Man is always played by someone else, so it was a kind of a trip to be like, okay, these are two different iterations within the universe, but it's still the same guy. And I think yeah, just like leaning into just remembering that like your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is in high school and like what it felt like at that age was kind of like when I was like, all right, I'm starting to feel like I understand this guy.
I mean, of course, when you previously played the role, I mean, I was reading interviews with you, and you said that you initially thought you were only going to have a few lines, and so you started off just being like, well, I'll play it similar to Tom Holland, and then as the process went on, you realized you could make it your own thing. So just want to know, like, what was your doorway into seeing what your take on Peter Parker was?
I think it was just being given the green light to have like some creative freedom with the choices. Like leading up to that point, and especially with What If, I was kind of in this limbo in the beginning of trying to kind of honor what Tom had done and like what people were expecting from that, and then also just as an actor trying to be honest and authentic. And then with this series, it was a bit of a sigh of relief because I felt like I didn't have to kind of copy anything and had the freedom to like make it my own. And I was talking a moment ago to someone and I was saying like I think the beauty about Spider-Man and each iteration is that it's people remembering what it felt like to be like young. He's so young, he's so hopeful, he's so optimistic, and it's like just channeling that all the time.
So how does I mean, it's time for the big question. How does this Peter Parker differ from the ones that we've seen before?
I mean, it's funny. It's got like a new identity baked in. I think like being in ninth grade in particular, like really, you feel that. Like, you feel that everything is the biggest deal in the world, and the stakes are so high at that age, and the hormones are going crazy. But also, man, like even the animation is such a cool flip. It's got this 1960s look, which is like really retro and like totally different than what I had seen at least.
It's not just Spider-Man that's been sort of reimagined here, but the villains as well. And I mean, Norman Osborn here is sort of a completely different character to who we've previously seen. Like he, from the end of the first episode, he's introduced as a mentor figure. So just want to know, do you see your Spider-Man as being a sort of more morally complicated figure now that he has this different mentor in his life?
Definitely. I think my favorite part of this series is probably Peter's relationship with Norman. It's really complex and like there's a lot of layers to it, and it's really cool. And it's a very different Norman, I feel like, to me than I'd seen. And yeah, I think our Spider-Man is constantly being put in positions that are questioning his morality in the most high stakes way that I've really seen Spider-Man have to deal with.
So you said that playing Spider-Man puts you back into the mindset of being a teenager, of being young. I just want to know, did you grow up with Spider-Man? Was it a big thing in your life? And how do you think the younger version of yourself would react knowing that you were now playing Spider-Man?
So yeah, I mean, I had my like 2 week freak out when this all became real because like Spider-Man just so happens to be like my favorite superhero. And I would tell you if it wasn't, if it was Iron Man or whoever, that was my guy. So this is really the first time in my life that I've ever, played a character that I was a fan of already. It was like, a bit daunting for sure.
Just before I have to wrap, I need to ask, I mean, obviously, Norman Osborn has been reinvented here. Were there any classic Spider-Man villains that you wish got a chance to be in this series?
You know what, man? It covers a lot of them. Sandman could be cool. My particular nostalgia were the Tobey Maguire ones. That's the age that I was at. That's what was in the movie theaters. So yeah, but it does a really good job of bringing in some people and some exciting new ones too. There's Scorpion and Butane and like some really cool new villains.
Well, I really enjoyed the series, and I'm glad that I managed to speak to you about it without spoiling anything. So that was great as well. Hudson, a pleasure chatting with you, and congrats again.
So nice chatting with you too. Thank you.
Thanks.